Okay, so last time we talked about the beginning of the Revolutionary War. This time we're going to talk about the major battles of the Revolutionary War. That includes Saratoga, Ticonderoga, Trenton, Princeton, and Yorktown. Some of these we'll go into much more detail about than others. And it's also fair to note that these are all American victories, and we'll talk in class about the fact that there's lots that America didn't win. So the first slide here, we're just going to quickly review our last set of notes. Which one dealt with Lexington and Concord, which ones dealt with Bunker Hill. So we're going to look here. The Old North Bridge was part of Lexington and Concord. William Dawes was one of the horseback riders that warned the people, right, that the British were coming. Same thing with Paul Revere. The British lose 1,000 men was definitely the events of Bunker Hill. Americans had the higher ground, was also Bunker Hill. It was a British victory over here in Bunker Hill. And the famous quote of the shot heard around the world comes from Lexington Concord. And don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes is the famous quote that comes from Bunker Hill. So now moving on to the battles that we were talking about here. In the beginning, really the battles were very small and mostly taking place up here in New England. Okay, most of the battles to start were up in this area here. But as the war continues to move south, the British had a plan that they wanted to conquer New York, right? New York is right here. And they hoped that if they conquered New York, they would divide the colonies into north and south. So if they took this colony here, right, they're going to actually end up dividing so that you have colonies up here and colonies down here, right? By dividing them in half, you would split up their communication network, their supply lines, all that kind of stuff. So what ends up happening is that the Redcoats easily take control of New York and Long Island, so here and here, okay? But what ends up happening is that they really struggle taking over this part of New York up here, upstate New York. Okay, they're much better at resisting. And it's simply because there's lots of wilderness there, lots of tricks and things that the colonists can use to their advantage, whereas in the big city, they didn't have that. Okay, so the New York State battles, or I'm sorry, New York colony battles would be the Battle of Ticonderoga, which was a fort in the wilderness, right? It's known as the gateway into Canada. Americans took the fort and forced the Redcoats to retreat and flee to Albany, okay? It would have been a quick little route from Albany to Montreal. You would have had to pass through Ticonderoga, so it was very strategic. And if the Americans wanted to keep the British up in Canada, it was kind of a necessary fort for them to take over. Saratoga is the other New York battle. This is an area just outside of Albany. It was a major victory for the Americans, right? They fought toe-to-toe in an open field with the British, right? That's supposed to be the British specialty, where they're unbeatable. And the Americans actually won in this, fight in line, linear formation type battle. And really, this cements the British, or this cements the New York militias and armies' stance at not letting the British take their state and divide them in half. Okay, so the plan the British had to occupy New York and separate the colonies fails really as a result of Saratoga. But Saratoga has another interesting result that we'll talk about in just a second. All right, so why did the British want to control New York? To control the ports, to split the colonies, to take over Washington's home, and to supply an access route to Canada. Okay, well, Washington's from Virginia, so that's not right. So really, it was to split the colonies B, like we had mentioned. Okay, so the battle, guys, of Saratoga really showed the rest of the world that the American colonists may have a small chance at actually winning this. Okay, nobody thought that the colonists would be able to unify and defeat the British. So really, France and Spain both think, we are enemies of England. These colonies are enemies of England. Maybe we should become friends, right? So France becomes friends, or allies, by sending supplies, money, and eventually troops, right? It's their navy that we use. Spain is kind of more of a silent partner. They end up sending money, and they also declare war on England to kind of divide their attention. Okay, so two allies from Europe. Now, the Battle of Trenton. Back then, armies didn't always fight in the wintertime. It was harder to find food and to be mobile. So the British were nice and comfy, camped out But the Americans really were hungry for another battle. So Washington sends 2,400 troops across the Delaware River on Christmas night and surprised them in their sleep. Okay, these were the British troops that were actually German, because the British hired Hessen troops, which were kind of a German area, to fight for their side. So the Americans come and capture 900 of these troops, which was a huge victory for Washington. Okay, now quickly I want to show you this picture. I'll come back to the Princeton slide. This is the famous George Washington picture of him crossing the Delaware River. Okay, you see the chunks of ice here, right? There's this author is this illustrator is obviously American. There's a nice heavenly glow behind Washington who's standing up, right? The flags flying in the wind. In reality, guys, this would have been a massive undertaking, back and forth, back and forth. You know, only a certain number of troops at a time, and they're moving, you know, almost 2,500 men back and forth in this icy, cold river, right? A lot of manpower rowing the boats, things like that. This was a massive undertaking, which is why the British were not expecting them to attack, because they knew they were on the other side of the river. Okay, but the sneak attack is a huge success at Trenton, and it's one of Washington's great victories in life, or great achievements in life. Princeton is in New Jersey, and after the defeat at Trenton, the British attacked the Americans in Princeton. The British were turned away and suffered yet another blow in the middle section of the colonies. Okay, so other facts, guys. The British had little success the British had success in most of the American cities, right? They took over New York, Philadelphia, Boston for a while, Charleston, and Savannah. The Americans had their success in the countryside. They knew the land, they knew where to hide, to attack, and ambush, and they knew quicker travel routes. Right? They could get the message across, they could move supplies much faster than the British, because really the Americans had the home field advantage. The Americans were able to drag out the war, which became too expensive and too unpopular in Great Britain. So without one final significant victory, the British would be forced to surrender, and they kind of knew it towards the end too. So which is not a reason that the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 was so significant? Did it put an end to the British plan to capture New York? Did it convince France to assist the colonists? Did it convince Spain to send money to the Americas? Or was it the final battle of the Revolution? It is A, it is B, and it is C, but it is not D. So the correct answer would have been D for that one. So, Yorktown. Yorktown, the Americans drove the British from the south to the middle part of the colonies. The British expected the Americans to make their big final attack on New York City, right? The troops in New York were hunkering down, right? They were ready for the colonists to attack New York City. Instead, Washington kind of surprises the British by attacking the army that was at Yorktown, Virginia instead, right? It's on the coast of Virginia near the Chesapeake Bay. It's actually right near where the colony of Jamestown was first established. So it's kind of ironic that British colonies in America started and British control in America kind of ended right in the same location. The Americans drove them back to the coast where their only escape was by sea. But the French Navy shows up and cuts off the British escape by sea. So you have the British surrounded by the Americans and French on the land and the French by the sea. So the Redcoats eventually have no choice but to surrender at Yorktown. Which two important battles took place in New Jersey? Saratoga and Trenton, Princeton and Trenton, Yorktown and Princeton, Princeton and Saratoga. The answer here is B. Okay, so America wins the Revolution. Woohoo! Right, this is why we are now the country of the United States of America. So the Treaty of Paris 1783, not to be confused with the one that ended the French and Indian War, but the Treaty of Paris 1783 officially ends the war, and the United States is an official country that's recognized by most of the world, right? Not necessarily the rest of the world, but it is recognized by lots of the major countries then. And now there's really a new question that emerges, and that is, now that we are an independent country, how will we run or organize the government of our new nation? Which is what we will talk about when we come back from the break. So, which is not true about the Battle of Yorktown? 8,000 Americans were killed, the British surrendered, the French Navy assisted the Americans, or it took place in Virginia? Okay, and the answer here is obviously that the 8,000 Americans were killed, right? B, C, and D are all true. All right, now, just a quick little refresh at this point. This one says, An impressive American victory in northern New Jersey, that would be Princeton. A fort in the wilderness that America captures, that's going to be Ticonderoga. The French Navy helps us, the war ends, America wins. That's going to be Yorktown. Americans cross the Delaware River and surprise the British. That's going to be Trenton. And it showed the world that the Americans could actually win, would be Saratoga. And the battle where the phrase was coined, "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes," that's Bunker Hill. All right, and that's it for our Revolutionary War notes.